But really the goal of this is to take a look at Microsoft data protection. Most of you have probably spoken to me at some point about really where Microsoft was at. I know that last summit I talked about, hey, IntelliSecure had some interest there, and we were really going to pursue that interest in Microsoft data protection capabilities. We thought there was enough. But now, since we saw that there was enough, really what does the next evolution really look like? Does it become the all-comprehensive, inclusive, enterprise-ready DLP solution for your enterprise? And so we'll do an evaluation. We'll talk about the emerging technologies. And then if we have some extra time at the end, we can go through some extra questions in areas of topic. There's also going to be an interactive poll. So at any point at the beginning of this presentation, we'll have a poll. So have your browser, your phone ready, and we can do some live discussion as well. So thank you for attending, and we'll get started. So for those that haven't really known me yet, we'll get into the introduction of who I am, is really that I've worked at IntelliSecure for a little over 5 years now. I'm the head of research and development and product management. So really my role here is to help define and invent products for IntelliSecure to take into the market. And my prior experience has been, you've either worked with me as a DLP engineer, maybe as a pre-sales engineer, vulnerability management. I've had a lot of different roles at this company that's given me a unique perspective about what our company is really, really great at doing, which is data protection. And then how do we take that into the market? What are some of the pains, the aches, and some of the things that I've heard from clients over my years that really would help, provide a technology or a solution to make data protection accessible, easier to manage, and at a lower cost both to ourselves and to our clients. And so really with the advent of FXSP, with the Broadcom DLP system back a couple of years ago, Kyle Armstrong and I worked on that pretty heavily to develop some type of machine learning that we eventually got a patent on, as well as that we also now have been spending the last 10 months developing and building Aperture. So for those aren't aware, we did release Aperture back in August. We've already had 2 updates to that application, and really we're charging down the Microsoft data protection stack, which we'll be talking about a little bit more in depth today. So for the next slide, I'm going to ask if you all get your browsers and phones out. We're going to do a live poll. It'll have the information provided there right at the top of the screen. You could respond to PolyV, Skylar Butler 820, or you can utilize your phone to text that. So really the first question that we have is, are you currently evaluating or planning a move to Microsoft for data protection capabilities? And I'll just give you guys a few moments while the poll comes in, but really the spirit of this question is really to define us as individuals that, we are under different stresses, be it through COVID-19, be it through the large amount of work from home, as well as, expanding or shrinking budgets around their data protection capabilities. And so really a lot of discussions have come from, Broadcom, I think initially spawned it when they acquired Symantec. Then we saw COVID hit. And then as we've moved through this progression over the last couple of years, we've really been determining about how, or what is the next thing that we can have an adjacency to meet the SASE, the zero trust, the digital transformation. There's a lot of buzzwords around what is happening, but really, basically, it's your data is no longer under your control, right? And so Microsoft has come out with a lot of wonderful tools and applications to help kind of incentivize users into moving into that. And we'll talk about what those tools are. So far we have 100% yes. We have a couple of respondents that have had no. So this is a pretty good indication that their evaluations or planning a move is really kind of on top of mind for a lot of individuals here, which is great to hear. What I've seen, I've had multiple conversations with several of you on the phone already, or those that I haven't, I would love to have conversations about really where does this fit in your data protection strategy. One of the difficulties is that Microsoft may not be the silver bullet. And honestly, when you look at digital transformation, there is no silver bullet. There isn't not a singular vendor that can cover all of your use cases. So we'll explore that, what kind of Microsoft covers, but great results so far. It looks like a majority of you are either evaluating or planning a move to Microsoft. So I'm going to go to that next question. So what would prevent you from moving into Microsoft as a data protection strategy? What are your biggest concerns and issues? And as this poll populates, I'd really like to figure out really what the top 2 answers are, and we'll go into further depth about what that means and see if I can address some of those concerns throughout my presentation. Awesome. So it looks like it's a good split. And for those that do select other, if you could just type into chat what maybe was on here that you felt like was missed and you had a different strategy, or if you'd like to discuss that, I'll take a moment, let the chat and let this poll populate, and then we can ask somebody who selected other really what those concerns would be. Okay, so Mr. Riley Ryan, who's the head of security at his company, really is confronted about migration difficulty. That's a great other. Yeah, thank you for that, Riley. Okay, so it looks like our top question is really the coverage of Microsoft data protection is insufficient to my current data protection needs. So that's the top answer, and that has been a concern, and a concern that I've highlighted prior, and also a concern that we'll review a little bit more. But I think what's surprising to me is that if you ask me this, if I was to ask this question 6 months ago, I feel like 90% of that would probably be answer A. I think that Microsoft is doing a wonderful job of developing, but not a great job of communicating really about what they're taking into that stack. We did see in terms of, around what we've seen specifically in Microsoft has been, there's been no web coverage, there's been no endpoint coverage. It really is just inside of the Microsoft applications, right? And that's been the standard for several years. What we've seen over the last 6 months is the expansion of the new DLP endpoint and others that we'll go into in a little bit of detail. The second top answer is management workflows, aggregation of alerts is too disparate for my team to consume. So one of the biggest weaknesses of Microsoft is that management and workflow and that aggregation. Fortunately, in terms of what IntelliSecure can bring to bear for that problem is the fact that we've developed Aperture to correct that issue. As you know, you have O365, you have MCAS, you have AIP, those alert, the DLP endpoint, all of those alerts go to different areas within Microsoft. Now, they are somewhat aggregated in the Compliance Center, the new Compliance Center, as well as the old Compliance Center. But the problem is that how do you understand and message those? And how do we then transform that information from how do I know when an O365 email is violated versus a cloud application that gets violated? How do we understand that? How do we communicate to ourselves internally at our company? And then how do we then escalate to our clients to have them understand, hey, this is what we're all talking about. How do we get all on the same page? And really from Aperture is the technology that we've developed to really shore up that gap, and really where we focus our experience with utilizing enterprise DLP applications for over 18 years. And then, so I think Jeremy has a Q&A to Mr. Joe Laitan, vendor lock-in with Microsoft combined, or lock-in with Microsoft combined with coverage. So I think that that's a really great understanding is that, Microsoft is open and robust in terms of their APIs, but it does seem like once you start down that path, you really have no way of pulling out or saying that there's a third-party integrator there. That's something that we're also highly looking at as well. But great answers, and thank you all for participating. We have 2 more questions left, so I'll go to the next slide. What product are you interested in within Microsoft Data Protection? So really what excites you? What's something that you keep a track of? What do you utilize to help understand, what's the most exciting areas? And look, we might not have all of the items up there, but really just focused around the DLP stack. Awesome. So it looks like Microsoft DLP is really taking the reign around email, OneDrive, but AIP is starting to fight for a little bit of ground here. So fortunately, what we support today in Microsoft is really around the 3 major components of data protection. And you can see them on our screen. M365 DLP, which covers email, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, Yammer, all of the other items within the M365 cloud that DLP can cover. Azure Information Protection, which is now being deprecated to Microsoft Information Protection. We'll talk a little bit about that later. The data classification and RMS schemas that help you kind of manage unstructured data, very popular tool. What you're also seeing with AIP is it's becoming, kind of back to Joe's question, is that you're seeing integrations across other types of third-party DLP software. So example, Broadcom had something called ICT, Information-Centric Tagging. It was a data classification tool that they had created to kind of work into their ICS system, which included ICA, ICT, and ICE, which was an encryption and an analytics platform. What occurred there is that they realized that ICT really wasn't fitting in terms of their product portfolio. And as Broadcom acquired them, their first option was to get rid of ICT. They've end of life that. So the question then is, well, what is Broadcom using? What is ForcePoint using for data classification? Is it Bolden James? Is it Titus? Actually, it's AIP. So a lot of these companies are going all in on the AIP train in terms of data classification. And the reasons they're doing that is because people already have it. So if you own an O365 E5 license, AIP is available to you. So instead of getting into a vendor discussion with, well, we'll bring in this third-party data classification vendor, we'll figure out a way to integrate, and it might cover 1 or 2% of the market share. When you look at AIP and it's covered about, everyone that has an E5 license, which is almost everyone that uses Microsoft has AIP, that powerful integration is something that larger companies and traditional DLP enterprise companies have gone after, is to take that AIP market share and be able to ingest it into their products. So we're seeing a huge shift across all of our DLP technologies to do that. And then finally, a little bit of MCAS, which honestly, I was surprised that it was so low. As we're seeing a lot of cloud proliferation, a lot of cloud security controls, a lot of concern about the cloud, I really assumed that would be higher, but you could really consider M365 a cloud as well. So it all makes sense to me at the end, but thank you all for participating. Wonderful answers. So last question, and then I'll take back the reins, but are you aware of ESIF, or End Customer Investment Funds, or Fast Track? Now, just a high-level explanation is ESIF, or End Customer Investment Funds, typically come when you purchase a Microsoft license. So if you have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft, be it a 3-year or 2-year agreement, and you're buying 30,000 licenses for your organization, typically what Microsoft will help is to sweeten that deal, is to provide end customer investment funds. So if you're to buy 30,000 E3 licenses, we're going to give you $50,000 into an ESIF fund. Now, you as a customer have to claim that fund and say, yep, I want to use that funding. And then you utilize a fast track portal to go and get that money provided to a partner. So what we'll explore a little bit, and what I'm trying to understand here in terms of the question is that there might be money that you already have in your possession that you just haven't utilized. So if you're looking at doing an implementation of O365 DLP and you need a partner, wink, wink, and Telesecure, to do that, then you could utilize those funds to then help for the implementation or pay for a year of managed services. So really what we're going to be doing as a Microsoft partner now is helping our clients that are moving to Microsoft make sure that we're utilizing all the resources capable to them. And what I could see now is that us as IntelliSecure need to provide more education around these types of funds, and really working with you as a Microsoft partner, not just your DLP partner, to really help understand how that will work. So thank you for your answers, but it sounds like we have a little work to do around educating everyone on those types of funding. So this is a chart that you've probably all seen before, but if you haven't, really what you're looking at here is the enterprise DLP that we're all familiar with, right? This could be a Broadcom, a ForcePoint, a McAfee. And it really just the standard coverage that we expect. So I know that 59% of you were really hesitant because Microsoft had gaps that you believe that couldn't be covered. And back in late 2018, early 2019, and even midway through 2019, this would have been a true statement, absolutely. You had email monitoring that wasn't really in terms of coverage through that. You have data at rest, which was slightly capable. The AIP scanner was just coming out. It wasn't able to do discovery. It really was only be able to be done on the shared drives that you put it on. The endpoint monitoring as well really just was non-existent. The reason I put a 3/4 moon there is simply because Defender ATP could enforce labels. So if data classification said confidential, just like my document up here, and I attempted to upload that, Defender ATP could say, hey, no, wait, don't do that. But it didn't have native DLP capability. What we also saw for the fingerprinting and EDM, which is something that a lot of our clients use for more complex policies, EDMs really weren't there yet. And fingerprinting had just taken off, but we hadn't really vetted it or understood it. OCR was natively baked in. And triage workflow and reporting, which was the second highest issue that people had identified with Microsoft, was just not there, right? You were kind of stuck with this compliance center, or you were stuck with doing triage by email. There's several clients on there that we did Microsoft for back in 2017, 2018. And we were triaging out of Outlook folders, which if anyone's had the pleasure of doing that, it's not great. So what we've developed and what we've understood as we've gone into Microsoft is what's now, what's the current October 21st, 2020 look at Microsoft. So email monitoring obviously hasn't really changed. They've gotten much better at providing policy tips, et cetera, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Web monitoring. So now with a direct integration with Zscaler or iBoss, you could provide some web monitoring DLP policies directly from Zscaler that integrates into the Microsoft security stack, which will forward those DLP alerts on to the Microsoft Compliance Center. So we do have some level of web coverage. However, it is not the same unified policy engine. So we have to be careful about thinking about, well, if it's a unified policy engine, but my Zscaler is slightly off or slightly different, then you start running into a little bit of disparity about policy. Is it congruent? Are those alerts funneling back? How can I respond to those alerts? They also have the ability from the DLP endpoint to start monitoring browsers, much like our current DLP endpoints do. Is you can hook into the browser. The problem is that's only for Microsoft Edge currently. So it doesn't include Google, Firefox, the old IE, other type, Opera, Brave, other types of browsers aren't included within that. So that's why it kind of gets a different score there in terms of not full. Data at rest capabilities. AIP Scanner has gotten a lot more advanced with the unified AIP agent. Not only will it go and scan databases, file shares, et cetera, but it also has network discovery. So it'll go out and crawl your entire network and determine, hey, this is an actual CIFS file share, or that's a Windows file system there that's shared, or hey, here's a database, here's a SharePoint, on-premise that maybe some Isilon is holding that, people might have forgotten about. It does the ability of going around and trying to do network discovery. So not just helping you understand where your file shares are, because there's been times where clients go, well, I know I have hundreds of them, and I know they're in these data centers somewhere, but I couldn't give you all the IPs and host names of those shares. So that's really a great capability that they've recently developed to really move data at rest scanning up into the Microsoft stack. Endpoint monitoring. So for those of you who have had a chance to read my blog that came out about a month ago, with some help from the folks over at HCA, so thank you, Greg and Leo, we really did an evaluation of the DLP endpoint from a perspective of really what was it capable of, what permissions did it have set, does it cover all the same use cases as traditional Broadcom? And at the end of this presentation, I'll have slides that will link you to that blog. And if we have extra time, we'll go through those results together and see what the endpoint's bringing to bear. But I'm highly confident that the endpoint, once it comes out of private preview, will be a wonderful enterprise tool to replace those traditional DLP endpoints. Fingerprinting and EDMs. So really what we've seen is the EDM has expanded into allowing at least 5 rows in tables to be joined together to create a DLP policy. Now, it's not as robust as, say, Symantec or ForcePoint, where you have the ability to classify each row, each understanding, and then having a match and also using it as an exclusion. Right? I know that there's several on the call that utilize EDMs, not just for detection methodology, but for exclusion technology. And so the problem with Microsoft is that while it does provide the EDMs, it does give you the ability to match columns and rows together within that exact document match. It doesn't allow it to necessarily be used as an exclusionary tool yet. And I think that that's a big limiter for a lot of some of our clients for moving into that policy set wholeheartedly. And what it has done is required clients to kind of rethink or reevaluate how they're doing email governance. OCR, so obviously OCR is still around, nothing really to talk about there. And then triage reporting and workflow, right? So what we've developed and I've focused a lot of my time as well as my team's energy, so Kyle Armstrong and now Will Schultz, our junior developer, has really focused heavily on triage, workflow, and reporting, right? So in terms of our pillars of our QMS system or what we provide our managed services clients are really around these major 3 pillars, doesn't really exist in Microsoft in an easy to use, customizable fashion. So if you've ever seen me do an Aperture demo, what I typically do is I try to triage in Microsoft Office. I'll go in, I'll go to the Compliance Center, I'll find an alert, and I'll say, okay, now how do I classify this? Well, you have dismissed or resolved as your 2 options. So that doesn't really help for KPIs, reporting, and understanding. Then to escalate, what you do is you simply send an email to a designated admin. So you can't send it to that person's manager or maybe the head of that department. You wouldn't probably even know who the head of that department is by looking at that alert. There's no Active Directory attributes. There's no enrichment of that data, as well as how does that workflow tie in? How do those statuses that we utilize, authorized business use, unauthorized business use, true positive, under investigation, how do those custom statuses build into a workflow where they can interact with our teams? And so in terms of Aperture, it's really where we focused a lot of our attention to shore up that gap. So as you can see from this here is that we've created a lot. Microsoft has filled a lot of gaps. We've also filled our own gaps here to really provide an enterprise grade solution that we think, by early next year, because some of these items are still in preview mode, that we'd be able to provide a full enterprise service across all of your environment's requirements within data loss prevention or compensating controls that can help meet those. With licensing that you probably already own, and maybe with ESIF funds that you already have. So I'll quickly go through the CASB system because it really hasn't changed since the last time. When Microsoft brought CASB onto the scene, their MCAS system, it was ahead of the market the second it released. The reasons why is because all of the integrations that it has natively with threat protection, with DLP, with UEBA, that a lot of other CASBs were separate modules that you had to pay for or required third-party integrations with, say, CrowdStrike. All of that is immediately ingestible into MCAS, and once you have that E5 license, you get all those capabilities. Right? The only knock that I have around the CASB system, and we'll talk about the advancements, and the API integrations are very slim. You have about 6 or 7 external API integrations, where clients on average, when you do a shadow IT audit, in terms of the visibility, you see about 1,600 applications on average. So in terms of trying to utilize CASB for all of your data protection strategies, maybe not the best solution. But really back to Jeremy's presentation, if you make it modular, if you're focusing on your critical assets and you have defined sanctioned applications and you're using M365, you're using Box, you're using SharePoint, then Microsoft MCAS can provide a really compelling use case about how to protect that information, as well as it directly integrates with the other DLP activities. So let's say you spent really hard work transferring all of your Broadcom policies into Microsoft, and you have everything defined, and you have all your sensitive info types, and you've built, and your data classifications. Now you want to turn on CASB. The wonderful thing about that is it utilizes the same policies. It utilizes the same sensitive info types. So you don't have to go back and recreate the wheel. You don't have to apply policies up into CASB. Is that it natively can be applied from the compliance that you're now, and we'll talk about in the next couple slides, really where we've seen that come and where is it going next. So really what I have now is a chance to pause for a discussion point. So what I've talked about so far is kind of what people's interests around Microsoft are, what are their hesitations. Now we're also seeing is that we have more capability that Microsoft is providing for data protection. So what have you all seen in terms of Microsoft security that have gained your interest? What are some areas of concern you'd have moving into Microsoft data protection? So, is that I think rather Ryan hit it, like the migration seems to be difficult. Trying to get all my rules and controls in there as a place. And then what other questions would you like to ask myself or things to the group that we could then discuss? And I'll give a few moments for people to type questions or unmute and ask a question.
Hey, Skylar, it's Riley.
Hey, what's going on, man? Good morning.
Hey, so the endpoint agent, we've got Symantec endpoint agent. How, I'm confused because you're talking about, AIP, Defender ATP. Where do you pinpoint the policies, and what agent is actually responsible for the endpoint DLP?
Yeah, so it's a little bit, and that's, I'm sorry, a little bit confusing, but it's a misnomer that it's an actual agent. It's just DLP at the endpoint. It's native inside of the operating system for Windows 10 and the Edge browser, the newest version of Edge. So it doesn't cover Windows 7, 8.1, 8, any of those older technologies. And I think it's 1908 or prior cannot be covered as well with this new technology. And so what it does is it's natively integrated into the operating system. You enroll that laptop or that desktop or endpoint into the compliance center. So you say, hey, Skylar's laptop XQR FD gets enrolled into the compliance center. And then from O365 compliance, where you set your DLP email policies, where you set your MCAS policies, where you set your SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams policies, there's now a new section called devices. And there's a slide I have that covers this a little bit better. But those devices slide is where then the policies get set. So then you can determine from that devices, hey, I want to look at print, I want to look at copy paste, I want to look at network shares, and I want to look at USBs. Those are the current capabilities that they provide. And then you can, a block, allow, or you could do a notification with user justification override. So a lot of the areas around the DLP endpoint has the same type of coverage that you're familiar with your semantic DLP endpoint. It doesn't have the native browser coverage like Firefox or Chrome or traditional IE, and it doesn't have some of the abilities to monitor applications directly. So the DLP endpoint can the semantic DLP endpoint can hook directly into, say, Zoom or other types of applications and look for sensitive data, transferring that through a DLL library. In the DLP endpoint natively in Windows, only supports Windows products, only supports Windows Office, Teams, etc., as well as the transfer of those files to USB, etc. So there's really a difference between the agent versus an agentless capability that's only built into the operating system, and that is still in private preview. So if you want to go in and check it out yourself, I would highly behoove you or your administrator go in and turn on private preview mode, and it'll then show up. And if you want to have me walk through that with you, Riley, please schedule a meeting and we can go through together and explore the endpoint and kind of what I've done with it so far. But thank you for your question.
Yep.
Okay, so Rick Johnson, could you comment on the add-in products that are needed to better protect engineering CAD information, especially when our current DLP examine the contents CAD document as it traverses the network? So CAD documents are a difficult place for Microsoft because what occurs is that they don't have native inspection CAD capability. So typically what we look for is that once it gets transferred into a PDF in its final state, before you say deliver it to a client or deliver it to a company to have it manufactured, if it doesn't leave that CAD format, then you're gonna have trouble with AIP classifying it automatically. However, the AIP unified agent that exists, that you can install on everybody's endpoint, you can classify any file in the file system structure. You could right-click and classify the file, but you can't enforce classification. So really, it would be on your users to right-click the CAD file and say, hey, I want to make this confidential. But we can't natively inspect that for sensitive information or provide an automatic classification through AIP. So it's fully manual, and there's really no double check on that. So that would be, in my consideration, a little bit of a gap around what you would have in data classification.
Yeah, this is Rick here. It's actually a pretty big gap because, you know, one of the premises of having a DLP is to protect ourselves against the actions of a rogue employee, where they might have an interest in miscategorizing or misclassifying, a document if they're wanting to get it out for some reason other than the proper one. So I know we've had some discussions with Jeremy about another third-party product that might be something that was usable there, but I was wondering if you might want to comment on that.
So really what's great about data classifications is that once they're added to the metadata of a file or a watermark, if the content is inspectable, be it the metadata of the file itself, then DLP policies could still apply, even though the file itself might not be readable. So Rick, in your example, if you have something fresh off the CAD press, and then your third-party solution comes in and classifies that and adds a metadata tag that Microsoft can read, so if someone attempts to send it via email or tries to share it out of OneDrive, then we'd be able to detect off that meta tag information and say, hey, this policy is now violated because they're trying to move this document. So there would be ways to do integration, but it would be a customized policy that we would need to enact to do that. But there are capabilities of integration through manual effort to get that done to where you feel protected and you do have classification on your unstructured intellectual property data. And then we have Felix. We are unable to get Microsoft to recognize our Perpetual Office 2016 license since our take on O365 is delayed until support ends for 2016 to 2023. However, we're interested in a replacement for ICT. I'll also be interested in the integration with Mimecast for Office 365. So I can't really talk a whole lot about Mimecast. I'm not really an email gateway expert. I could probably get you some information from Josh, or Jeremy might have some additional information as well. But really, if you're looking at a replacement for ICT, AIP is your solution. So Broadcom will be moving to AIP by next year. I've talked to their product manager, I think Jeremy has as well, and they have a really strong commitment of being able to ingest AIP information at the beginning of next year. So really my recommendation on the ICT replacement would be AIP, or now known as MIP. The problem being is though you have to have an O365 license to do that. So you're kind of in a bit of a situation to where if you're going to stick with Office 2016, they do have native DLP built inside of that. But if you really want the capability of not just classifying data and being able to protect it abroad, you're going to have to move into O365 at some point to get the abilities of doing that. Now, you wouldn't have to necessarily migrate everything over to get the AIP, but if you're going to use Microsoft E5, it would make sense to, move your email, move your Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other types of Office applications into M365 for that capability to then take full effect. Because if you had disparity between your on-premise and just AIP, you could still do classification and labeling, but you would lose the ability to do auto classifications and policies that really make AIP so powerful, is when you let the application work for you. Oh, a lot of questions. Thank you, guys. So it looks like Jeremy touched on Tim's question. Do you think Microsoft will include other browsers in the future? It does. I think that, so in terms of what we did test, Jeremy, around the endpoint, to Tim's point, is that what we can do from the endpoint is either allow or deny those browsers. So if I want to say, hey, do sensitive content inspection on Edge, and then do not allow anyone else to use Firefox or Chrome, you could disable those browsers through the endpoint. So if someone attempts to open up Chrome and starts pasting information, the DLP endpoint will say, hey, Chrome, if you want to actually utilize any information or provide any company information, you're going to need to utilize Edge. So it kind of forces users into utilizing Edge Chromium, as opposed to just saying, hey, we can monitor all browsers. But that's kind of Microsoft's standard affairs, that they really shove you into using browsers. If anyone remembers, about 20 years ago, they got in pretty big trouble for that. Maybe they'll get in trouble again, who knows. But really, they're focused on their own browser for that sensitive data protection. Hi, Cody. So this is Cody Vito with Southwest Gas. I have concerns about Microsoft data protection capabilities with MS Teams. Can you speak towards that? Direct messaging, file sharing between VDIs or endpoints utilizing NetMotion. So if you look at Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive, it's really the same thing in terms of what it utilizes. So everything is stored in the OneDrive as a backend. So when you upload a file of Teams, that's really OneDrive. When you upload things to your SharePoint site, that's really OneDrive. SharePoint is an organizational structure about how that's interacted with that data, right? So how information is saying, hey, I want to store something in Teams, that goes into my Teams folder. I know that people in my team have access. SharePoint might be hey, this is the marketing SharePoint site for marketing information. That also is backended at OneDrive as well. And so when you have protections across Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint natively in M365, it's talking about where those files are stored, or more of a data at rest capability and a sharing capability. So if I were to open my Teams and share out a file, for example, to someone, they would say, okay, that contains sensitive information. You're not allowed to share outside of your domain. Now, for direct communication, if you're chatting with a third party and you just drop a file in, that's actually a different capability. That's called Teams Communication. So Microsoft has a separate area called Teams Communication that handles the direct messaging, the live file sharing, the video conferencing. That type of information is handled as a separate policy and a separate module within M365 DLP. So if you look at the two, you have kind of your data at rest capabilities, which is what's native there. And then you have Teams Communication, which is your data in motion capabilities. So there are ways to monitor Teams communication. And if you look at integrating with insider threat or other things, you can apply non-DLP policies, but for example, like abusive language or malicious intent, or discrimination or discriminatory terms, racial slurs, things of that nature. You can actually start monitoring your internal users for threatening, violating content against other employees as well. So that's the Teams communication piece. And Cody, I'll be happy to sit down with you and we can go through some of that information at a separate meeting if you would like me to do so. So just to be good on time, I'm going to pause questions for now. Yeah, no problem, Cody. And what we'll do is that we will continue on the presentation to get through the rest of the slides. And then at the end, I should have a little bit more time and I can come back to some of your questions. But hey, thank you all for the great participation. I really appreciate it. So really, what's next for Microsoft? So the four main areas I want to talk about that I think we'd all have interested in is they're continuing to advance the API integrations for MCAS. So MCAS is expanding. The unified approach to policy management. So no longer do you have to go to MCAS, AIP, O365 to manage all your policies. And Aperture is going to be assisting in a little bit of that as well. Microsoft Information Security, so Azure Information Protection is dead. Okay, long live the new king of MIP. So a lot of the problem with AIP is that you have to manage it in two separate areas. You have to go into Azure, the Azure portal, to manage global policies, how globally AIP is applied. And then if you want to actually apply individual data protection sensitive info types or auto classification or auto labeling policies, as well as retention, then you do that inside of M365. So right now they're kind of floating in two different areas, and Microsoft's highly aware of the contention that that's causing for clients. And so what they're going to do is move it all into M365, rebrand it to remove the Azure part so we don't confuse people thinking it's still in Azure, and that it really becomes Microsoft Information Protection. Now, there's also additional capabilities that Microsoft Information Protection is going to provide, like information barriers. So internally, you can provide, we'll call them logical firewalls in between companies. So engineering and development can't talk to HR or share files that are tagged specifically for those types of things, but HR can share it to engineering for their healthcare policies and things of that nature, and employee handbooks. There's also additional benefit around the RMS, or the rights management services, that provides around MIP that helps you encrypt, quarantine, classify, as well as remote destruct or provide retentions on all your files. And we'll talk a little bit about and have some use cases around that. And then advanced user notification and policy tips. So one of the biggest things that I noticed when I first tested the DLP endpoint, as well as other Microsoft products, is that the user feedback is very weak. Either it doesn't tell you what happened, or it just says, hey, this has violating content in it, good luck. So what they've developed now around these policy tips is a way to inform users about what violated, how they can self-correct, and really provide users the information to self-regulate in terms of what they could be violating. So for all of us security folks, if someone can fix their own problems, it's just IT in general, then hey, that's a great win for all of us. And we'll talk a little bit about those capabilities. So the new MCAS API integrations, really this is kind of the five main areas that they've just released. Box and Dropbox came out when MCAS did, but G Suite, Salesforce, and now Cisco WebEx are fully supported by MCAS. This just does not include DLP, data at rest scanning, or understanding the files there and how they're shared, but it also will handle conditional access control policies about who can access, or you're coming from an unmanaged device, what devices are allowed, and if they are unmanaged, what can they do versus if they're a corporate-owned device. So really great benefits to help people protect corporate data, but also be flexible for work-at-home capabilities like BYOD. I know that, like in particular, my wife and her company had to send everybody home, and they had these containerization apps like AirWatch on their phones, and they had to set up all these conditional access policies, and they didn't have Azure AD to do that. And so they're trying to figure out with Okta or Ping how to create those with a different CASB system. What Microsoft does is streamline that process, because if you're utilizing Microsoft Identity and utilizing your Microsoft Identity, like your domain creds, you could automatically get rerouted to where you need to go and automatically apply conditional access without having to set up a bunch of SSO redirects like you typically have to do with the traditional CASB. So this is true plug and play, conditional access policies that you can directly manage from Azure AD if you have the credit licensing to do so. So I know that we talked a bit about the where policies are applied, how are they applied. So if you can see this screenshot here, what we have is this unified policy engine. So this is in the E5 Compliance Center. This is the new Compliance Center that got spread out or split off from the Security and Compliance Center of old. And now what they've done is they've added almost every capability of policies that you could provide into a singular area. And that's really important. It's important because one is that it includes things like cloud and endpoint that typically would be in their own separate areas to manage. Two is that the sensitive info types that get created. So if you have a sensitive info type is a data identifier in traditional DLP terms. It's a custom way to identify that information as opposed to a pre-canned out-of-the-box policy. Those sensitive info types can now be applied to Teams chat and channel messages. So I think that there was I think Tim asked that question earlier about, is there a difference between communication versus, on-premise, and there is. Devices, so this would be your your endpoints, your mobile devices that utilize Windows. I don't remember the last time I've seen a Windows phone, but it's there. And then Microsoft Cloud App Security, so protecting your applications with the same DLP policies, the same users, the same exclusions that you would want to apply can now be applied across all of these different channels. So really excited about this in terms of the DLP capabilities that we're seeing coming out of Microsoft. And it sounds like they're listening to us, and as everyone as well, that we need singular places to manage these It's kind of gotten out of hand, but they're starting to combine all of that into a location. So really also what we have is Microsoft Information Protection. Now I talked a little bit about this prior, but as you can see in this video is that, now that it's in M365, it also can help have editor suggestions. So in that video, it's able to show the user that not only is there sensitive information here, it'll highlight it within their document for them. And so they can immediately either, obfuscate it by putting X's there in the last 4. They can, delete it all entirely. And maybe once they delete that, then they could send that email. So it's a great way of saying, hey, I'm not just going to put you in quarantine. You're going to have to wait 24 hours. We're going to release your email. And then, finally someone gets it and the employee's kind of angry about the delay, is that now they have the ability with the policy tips to self-correct what's going on inside of that document. So really powerful feature. And then what it also could do is help suggest tags. So you see that apply sensitivity button right here. It can also suggest, hey, for sensitivity information, sorry about that. For sensitivity information, what would you recommend? Since it's a credit card, it might be strictly confidential, and then it'll also apply that label. Another big thing that it also has is double key encryption. So now Microsoft doesn't just say, hey, trust us, we'll use our Azure key generated keys to encrypt all of your data. You can actually use a double key to where you provide a company-based key, Azure provides a key, and without both of those keys, then you cannot decrypt the data. Now, this does provide usability and limitations on, hey, if you're not connected to the internet, if you don't have an AIP agent, you wouldn't be able to get this decrypted. But it's really used for your most sensitive information, the intellectual property that should never leave the business, or even for that matter, the group that it's assigned to. So with double key encryption, you can double protect that information, not just relying on an Azure key, which could be, God forbid, eventually cracked or breached, but also your own key, so you have control over that data. So if you remove your key, all of that data becomes unusable. So an interesting way of looking at highly sensitive, highly confidential information and using DKE to cover that use case. They also, what they've done is made a more robust AIP scanner. So DAR used to be a pretty big weak point inside of the Microsoft security stack. It wasn't able to understand where things were, how to scan those, how to get information or apply all of that information. And also the biggest problem that people have when adopting a data classification system is that, hey, I've got 8.7 million files. None of them have classifications on that. My users will never get to classify those. How do I solve that problem? Now, there are other companies like Varonis and other things out there and Big ID that can go and tag that information. But now Microsoft with their information protection scanner has the ability to go and tag that data for you, and also cover all these use cases. So file shares, NAS storage, SharePoint servers, SQL databases, AIP really becomes the way to detect those. So it can go out and find those where those are located and provide you a report. Here's your shares, here's your databases, here's your NASs that are Windows-based. It can scan for sensitive information and then automatically apply that label. And then as a part of the scanner, you could define what you want to ignore, what you want to not be labeled, or even particular labels that you don't want to apply. So for example, you'd never want the public label to be automatically applied. You could remove that from the auto policy label. And so that will allow you to go through and tag all of your information. So really one of the use cases around this is that are people looking to migrate from on-premise file shares or on-premise SharePoint and databases up into the cloud, into Azure or OneDrive. Really, this would be a great exercise that before that migration, you can help classify that data, not just apply sensitive information tags, but also be able to apply retention tags. Hey, this data now has a 2-year expiration date on it. So as it goes up into the cloud, you can set that expiration date the second it hits that cloud repository. And now you're not stuck with 18, 15, 20-year-old data, because old data could be harmful, but yet it doesn't provide any value to your business. And you could really have a great chance at getting rid of a lot of that, doing really a great job of cleaning up when you're doing that migration. And then you can even set things as a part of your migration service to say, hey, if it's older than 5 years, I don't want it there. Once it hits the cloud, it has a 2-year expiration date based off last modified. If no one touches it in 2 years, it goes away. And that's how we keep our data maintained here. Or whatever your compliance needs are, we can set automatic policies based on sensitivity to really link with retention. And that's one of the more powerful things I've seen a data classification tool do, is the ability to map not just sensitivity and classification, but also that retention side as well. So that really helps people kind of maintain their data and be able to handle and understand what the retention policies for those are based directly to compliance. Makes it really easy to audit, right? Strictly confidential means PCI data, which means I keep it for 7 years, but I have 12 months of direct records, yada, yada, yada. Right, bang, bang, bang. That auditor would love to see that. And you can show the workflows and the process and the policies behind that. That's a slam dunk. So user notifications at the endpoint. So the endpoint itself, when it first came out, really didn't tell me what was going on. So I plugged in a USB, I uploaded a sensitive, dummy social security file, and then it just said write protected. And then I hit okay, and I tried again, it said write protected. So if I wasn't understanding that I was testing an endpoint agent, I would think, well, my USB is messed up, or maybe I need to reformat it, right? It didn't give me a clear indication of what was happening. Well, now there's a pop-up that they've just released that allows them to actually understand, hey, there's a reason why you're being blocked now. Now when you go to the USB, I get this wonderful pop-up that makes sense. And so that pop-up is really there in determining, what's going on. What you also have the ability is to dismiss with a justification. Now you can enable that or not, but what it does allow is an understanding, and this is huge for us if we've ever worked in, with a DLP endpoint before, is to understand why users are doing what they're doing. Right? Most people either aren't aware, that's what their manager told them to do, that's what they've done for 5 years and now it's wrong and I don't understand why. Those types of justifications help us understand, is it a broken business process? Was the manager, not clear on their instructions? Was the user not trained, or they just don't care? Or are they acting maliciously? Right? So all of that content and understanding needs to provide feedback into it. And so all those justifications, or all the times that people hit cancel or ignore, gets fed into the Insider Risk Management console for context. And that provides a risk score for those users based off the justifications they select, or based on how often they utilize justifications to dismiss this data from being allowed. Because maybe you don't want to just set a hard block and you still want your users to do it, but now we have the ability to stopgap them with IRM to say, hey, this user's used this justification 12 times in a row and it's always sensitive, and I've talked to their manager and they said that's not okay. Maybe we need to open an investigation on why the user is doing those things. So a lot of great capability that are coming out of the endpoint that we're seeing. And then here's an example of pop-ups now being able to be displayed on third-party cloud applications like Dropbox. So no longer is it just kind of in the realm of Microsoft, but just to note that you need the Microsoft Edge browser to do these pop-ups. So a lot of people probably aren't on board with jumping onto that browser just yet. I use it myself personally, but there's probably a lot of room for growth inside of what Microsoft Edge, and people are moving to Chromium Edge as a business tool, and I just don't think it's there yet. Great. So this is my last slide, and we'll get into discussion. So is it ready? So really the summary of what we've seen so far is that I think it's almost there. It's almost ready. Some of the things that you all have highlighted to me and we've had a discussion about are kind of the reasons why. Migration seems to be difficult. The licensing seems to be hard to understand. I have this E5, but I need this premium P1 to do this one thing. Microsoft is doing a better job of simplifying those licenses. They've come out with the compliance or the security licensing. Now, if you just want to go all in on compliance, be it advanced discovery, customer lockbox, e-discovery, advanced audit capabilities, information barriers, on top of all the DLP capabilities, then you can just buy the E5 compliance license. Security is much like the same. XDR, or their MDR solution, their SIEM, their Defender ATP, their antivirus, their Azure ATP, etc., now becomes a separate security package. So the packaging is getting simpler to understand. The products are becoming more advanced. We've developed our own product aperture to help, kind of deal with the output of all of those products. And so that's why that first bullet, you may require an MSP or a third-party integrator to truly make it work for your business. And so, we're happy and proud to have our tool and our understanding of Microsoft to help you, but there also might be third-party integrators to other types of tools that you need Microsoft to integrate with that the other third parties could help. The additional features constantly change. So this could be a plus or a negative. Mostly for security people, we don't like when our policies all of a sudden disappear and go somewhere else, or a capability that worked yesterday doesn't work tomorrow. Microsoft is in a large amount of flex around their security tools if you looked over the last year or so. And so we, as well as myself, try our best to stay on top of things, test them as they come out, understand how it impacts the overall data protection strategy and overall the Microsoft security strategy. But sometimes things just get slipped by. They don't provide an article, they don't post it. You go in, you're like, well, that worked that way yesterday. Why doesn't it work today? Like the endpoint, for example, didn't pop up, didn't get announced 2 weeks until after it was actually developed. Those types of things could cause flux or uncertainty. But I also think that it shows that Microsoft is going to continually to advance and provide better functionality that we're all looking for that might have prevented us from moving from Microsoft in the past. The ability to report and get KPIs. So Microsoft's in-house reporting doesn't really work for us, and it doesn't really work for a lot of our clients because it doesn't cover the KPIs and the things that we as security personnel are interested in. Now, I think the Azure Sentinel SIEM does a great job if you want to aggregate all your data there and run reporting, but that's a pay-per-as-you-go model. Nobody kind of wants to pay for reports. So what we did is that one is Aperture has a dashboard that provides information. And we also have APIs that get exported into a visual business intelligence tool like Tableau. So we have the capability of providing those advanced reports and really shoring up that weakness that we see within Microsoft. So overall, I would say that, if you were to say A through F, F being, no way, you would never use it for enterprise, into A+, like, hey, everyone should be using it. Back in 2018, I would have given it like a C-. I would say small to medium, compliance-driven only organizations should be using Microsoft. Now I'm saying it's about an A-. I think that it has all the capabilities that most people utilize day-to-day within data loss prevention. Obviously, like Rick pointed out, there are particular use cases that Microsoft will not cover. So I don't think it's quite there to cover all of your intellectual property needs or unstructured data needs. But I think that if you have sensitive data in O365, you're using it for email, you're using it for collaboration, you're using it for storage, it's definitely something that you will need to protect you in the future. So with that, I will end my discussion. I thank you all for attending. We can open up for some questions and discussions. And then as I share this deck, here's some additional things that I will provide to you all as a part of the slide deck that you can go read. I highly recommend the security compliance blogs because it's a great place to see what's coming out, what's new. You have engineers and people explaining how it works. So I recommend bookmarking that. And then if you're really more interested in going deeper into my DLP endpoint evaluation, please utilize this blog, and it kind of goes through my results, the testing, and what it's capable of. And so with that, we have 5 minutes for questions, or if you just want to go take a quick bio break before the next presentation, that's cool too. So thank you all for attending today. Really happy to speak with you all today, and please let me know if you have questions.
Hey, Skylar, it's Riley. Just a couple of comments. The Microsoft integration sounds great, but there are so many limiting factors that just don't make it feasible. I think when I really look at it, it's, you've got to be on the latest Windows. You've got to have Edge. You've got to, you can't, what if there's still a bunch of Windows 7 out there? It seems like a great concept, but applying it to a manufacturing company who has a lot of legacy gear out there just doesn't seem set up for that yet. Just a comment.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree with that. I think that, Windows 7 should be EOLing next year. They just extended that. But, as we're just getting rid of some of our legacy systems too, I completely understand the difficulty of that. And you're right. From that regard, it does make it not as attractive if, hey, I can only cover 30% of my business while everybody else is on Macs, Linux, or old versions of Windows. Then yes, you're correct. It wouldn't be a great fit for that type of organization. But, if really what we do and what's capable is that it doesn't mean you have to throw out your current semantic DLP endpoint just to embrace Microsoft. Now you're starting to deal with, different technologies, obviously, and different policy sets, which can add complexity. But, to the point of that, that's really kind of what you pay IntelliSecure to deal with, right? So if you were to say, hey, I just want to use Microsoft for my email or cloud and keep my DLP endpoint, how do I understand about triage and where does all of that information get collected? How does it get correlated into reporting? That's really where the benefit of the managed service can come in and help you with that. But I agree. I don't think that for your particular use case, Riley, that going full down the Microsoft path would be the right solution for you because of those issues that you described.
Good to know it can be split up though. Yep.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So Tim asked, are all those features described available today? So they are available today through a private preview mode. And I'll just quickly go back in my slides, and we can talk directly about, kind of what the expected roadmaps of those are. Sorry about that. I'm having a little trouble with my PowerPoint right now. There we go. So we'll go back to the beginning of the four main areas that Tim asked. This is available today. So the advanced API integrations for these are available today. That is public release. This is also public release for the Unified Policy Engine devices, though the DLP endpoint is in double key encryption in this new information protection. Those are in private preview. So this will come out at the beginning of next year. They said Q1 of 2021. Microsoft timelines are kind of wonky. Sometimes it'll come out a month earlier. Sometimes it'll come out 3 months later. But the full MIP kind of new technologies, the like double key encryption and sensitive content are in preview mode right now. Those should be released sometime in the next 3 months. Network discovery, though, for the MIP scanner, this is available today. And then user notifications and just the DLP endpoint in general is still in private preview mode. But this, for example, this release just came out a couple weeks ago. But it will also release sometime at the beginning of next year into public availability or general availability. Good question, though. Thank you. All right, so we have 2 minutes left, or a minute left now. So I'll go ahead and turn this back over to Mr. Sherwood. Again, thank you all for attending. Thank you for all the wonderful questions. And as always, Skylar.Butler@IntelliSecure. I'll be more than happy to sit down with any of you to cover anything in more detail and more in depth. You want to see the endpoint, you want to see Microsoft, you want to see Aperture, please reach out to me. Please reach out to your executive account manager, and I'll be more than happy to sit down and have a one-on-one discussion with you all. So thank you again. You guys have a wonderful rest of your summit, and take care.